1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan, along with Ardina Seward. Our third member, Peter Moses, is not in today. And Ardina, how are you doing?
Good. I'm sitting here looking at the empty chair with I'm going to spin it around and make it face the desk. trying to bring some order to the set because Peter's not here. Well, it's quieter today.
Hopefully from wherever he is right now, he won't phone in and take over your airtime like he tends to do sometimes.
Oh, God, we'll have 10 minutes of talk time if Peter phones in.
Well, we do have a called-in guest, and he represents, I guess, a cultural touchstone for America because for, well, pretty much half a century, Saturday afternoons in America were spent in front of a television, and they would begin with this.
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat. The human drama of athletic competition. This is ABC's Wide World of Sport.
And ABC's Wide World of Sports was an earth-shattering program when it first came out. It was a novelty. It was something that revolutionized sports broadcasting, and we're pleased to have one of its early performers who went on to have a very long and distinguished career, Doug Wilson, as a producer and a director there. Doug managed to win 17 Emmy Awards for his service there. And Doug, welcome back to the program. I think it's been about 2 or 3 years since we've had you on the show.
Well, it has been, and boy, what a wonderful thing to hear that opening again. You know, it's that lingo has become part of American culture. If you ask somebody that's say over 40 years old, if you say to them the thrill of victory, they're liable to return and say the agony of defeat back at you.
Absolutely right, and you know, our audience probably isn't familiar with all of your achievements. As I mentioned, you won 17 Emmy Awards, but you covered 51 different types of sports out there. You must have you must have had to learn a lot of different things.
Well, I did, and you approach a lumberjack championship with an eye on something new and something different and something entertaining. You know, the key phrase in that opening was the following line: the human drama of athletic competition. You know, drama, theater and sports. How do they mix? Well, we approached Jim McKay and I and a lot of my colleagues approached these events as if we were doing sports theater. We felt that the only difference between what was going on a Broadway stage and what was going on in an arena was that on the Broadway stage the script of the drama has already been written, and it was our job to follow the plot lines in whatever direction they were going to go. And
I was going to say, and you brought a certain extra dimension to that because if I remember correctly, you were involved with theater in college.
I was involved with theater in college, theater and music. I was a leader of a group called the Colgate 13 a cappella group. We did 129 concerts my senior year, and I was the MC and the leader, and that set me up too. Jim McKay used to give me credit for being the first one on television to put sports to music, and I can't claim that myself, but I appreciated his giving me that recognition. Leni Riefenstahl, of course, did it back for Hitler. She did it in 1936
with Olympia,
with the Olympiad movie that she did, and at the same time I was doing that while NFL Films were doing the same thing on film. So, but we did bring the music to sport as well. So theater was part of the approach to the programs.
And bringing music was very important, I think, because when you look at the great movies that are out there, many of them have the most memorable scores. I mean, you have Gone with the Wind. Everybody knows that theme. And my personal favorite, of course, the theme to The Magnificent Seven, which was later used for cigarette commercials because it was so popular.
Right. Did you know that the wide world almost never came within 5 minutes of never getting on the air?
I did not. Tell us that story.
Well, it's an interesting story. Roone Arledge and Ed Sherrick, who were running a company called Sports Programs. There was no ABC Sports department per se in 1959 and 61 in that area. And Ed Sherrick had the rights to NCAA football, and ABC began to do football games. When the football season was over, Sherrick and Roone got together and put together this idea of a program that would present to the American people sports with which they were not familiar. And they brought the idea to Leonard Goldenson, the CEO of ABC. And Leonard Goldenson didn't think it was a very good idea. He just thought it would never be profitable. But he said, "Okay, you guys can put it on in the summer with two requirements. You get a sponsor, and you get a sponsor by 4:00 Friday afternoon."
Uh-oh.
Well, yeah. So they went up and down Madison Avenue for the week, and they couldn't get anybody to take the bait. And it got to be 3:30 Friday afternoon, 4:45, 5 minutes to 4, the phone rang, and I think it was Gillette razor blade. I'm not sure if it was the Gillette products or whether it was Marlboro cigarettes. I don't recall, but it was one of the two, I think. And then and because of that, the show went on the air, and 37 years later, it went off the air as a regularly scheduled program.
And it was an amazing combination of events that just came to make it all work, because CBS was cutting back on their staff at the time, and Jim McKay's final broadcast for them was the Masters Golf Tournament, and he didn't know what he was going to be doing, and he got approached by Arledge to come and join the broadcast.
And Arledge was if I may interrupt for a second, Arledge was very much beloved. I don't know, if you're aware, but I am an ABC alumnus, having worked for them for years, and many of the cameramen from Wide World of Sports ended up working in news, and they all adored Roone.
Locally at WABC. And with that, we can hear our theme music starting up here. So we'll take a break. This will be our longer break, Doug. This will be back-to-back news and business breaks. But you're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Ardina Seward, and our special guest is 17 Emmy Award-winning producer-director Doug Wilson from ABC's Wide World of Sports, one of the legendary sports programs that revolutionized the sport. And when we come back, we'll talk to Doug a little bit about some of the more memorable experiences of his time there and some of the innovations that ABC Sports put out there that we still see today. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after a brief break.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, folks. We are here. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio on a rainy, almost, I want to say, monsoon Monday. Hope I'm not exaggerating.
I think you are for now, before that hurricane hits North Carolina in a couple days.
Well, God willing, they will be all right, and the eye of the storm will pass them by. But if not, well, they've been there before. I am Ardina Seward, along with John Charan, minus Peter Moses today, who is preparing for the holiday. And we have a special guest from Wide World of Sports, Doug Wilson. The name of his book is The World Was Our Stage. spanning the globe with ABC Sports, and that's a long introduction to you, Doug. But
well, thank you, Irene. I appreciate it. We were working for the same company for a while, weren't we?
yes, and I have a million questions to ask you, because we were talking earlier before the break about how local news and I guess network news too inherited some cameramen from Wide World of Sports, who I have to say were very innovative. Wide World of Sports was probably the premier stage for technical stuff. You had to shoot in all different weather conditions, rain, snow, wind, and the camera people became very innovative. And a lot of that translated to working in local news. I was talking to John during the break about how if you had a long cable run to get to a breaking news story, you wanted to have a guy who had worked Wide World of Sports, because they knew the ins and outs of how to run a cable, matter of fact, how to prepare it, and how to make things work in adverse weather conditions. So I'd like to talk about how you kind of innovated live broadcast, live photography in Wide World of Sports.
Well, I'm reminded that the first show that I ever was assigned to work on ABC's Wide World of Sports was a swimming event. In Silver Springs, Maryland, and we put the camera in the water.
Oh no, I'm cringing. I'm cringing when I hear this.
We opened the show with a group of women swimming toward camera underwater, and it was really with a sign that said Wide World of Sports that was made of plastic. So yeah, we did a lot of it. And you know, what really made Wide World of Sports possible was videotape and jet travel. Believe it or not, that's what at the end of the 50s, when we could get the tapes back quickly and put them on the end of the quickly at the end of the week, or because we didn't do a lot in the beginning. We didn't do a lot of live shows, except the first show that was ever on was live. It was 2 track meets, the Penn relays and the Drake relays, and it was Rune's concept to runologists that we mentioned to bounce back and forth between the 2 events, and that got the show started. But yes, we did a lot of innovative things. Small cameras, handheld cameras were a new thing, and even in 1968 at the Olympic Games in Mexico City, we had a first wireless handheld camera was experimented with there. Video slow motion. We hadn't in the beginning. When it's hard to believe now when you think of television and you think of what's going on today and the technical capabilities that are available. We didn't even have slow motion replays in the beginning. So you can imagine, as you say, Dana, the progress was extraordinary. There were no satellites. It's hard for people to even think now. We couldn't feed a show from Europe to the United States live. There were no satellites up there until 1964, 63-64.
I was going to say the first live sporting event using the satellite was the 1965 24-hour Le Mans automobile race, so that was really in the 5th year of the program.
That's right, and the first signals we did, I think it was called Telstar, and it wasn't locked in. It passed over. It was in the it revolved around the planet, and you had 20 minutes of use of the satellite as it went across, and we did feed signals from the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck. When it passed over, we did feed signals to the United States, but nothing with any real long continuity, because it was only about 20 minutes of time.
And that was so. God bless the engineers, because having worked again in news many years later, that window was so critical, because if you missed it, then the shot was not going to get on the air. You would have to, I don't know when the next next window would come through, and it was extremely expensive at that time. It cost thousands of dollars.
It's absolutely right. It's right. And by the time 1972 rolled around, and that's not a lot of time. I mean, you think of 1964, 65 to 1972, you do the arithmetic, it's only a few years. And that was when the horrible tragedies in 1972,
the Olympics.
Olympic Games took place, and we had the satellite the whole time. We had reserved the satellite for the Olympic Games, so we were the only network that had coverage of that tragic event. And Roone wouldn't give it up.
And I remember, every once in a while, the stock footage will reappear with Jim McKay's broadcast, and it was remarkable, because here was a guy who was an experienced broadcaster, and he had to relate the events, and he still had to separate his own emotions from the event, and you could feel his angst in that broadcast. It was one of the remarkable moments in TV broadcast history that, it's not only for journalism students, but I think for viewers as well. It was one of those.
Absolutely, Ardino. It was. You're talking about a man who was primarily a journalist to begin with.
And Doug, you're going to have to hold that thought. You're going to have to hold that thought, Doug, because we're going to have to take another break here. We're speaking with Doug Wilson, a winner of 17 Emmy Awards as a producer and director with ABC's Wide World of Sports. And you're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM. We'll be back after a brief Fox News break with more information and more discussion about how broadcasting came of age with Doug Wilson right after this.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
With Ardina Seward today, and we're speaking with Doug Wilson, a winner of 17 Emmy Awards as a producer and a director with ABC's Wide World of Sports. And ABC's Wide World of Sports has the honor, I guess is the right word, of being able to bring sports from what was widely regarded in the broadcast industry as the playroom into being a legitimate grown-up activity. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Jim McKay, the voice for Wide World of Sports, and basically the man who was most well known for Wide World of Sports as the announcer, as a person who always sounded like your next-door neighbor, he was the one who spearheaded the broadcast and the description of the action when the hostages were taken at the 1972 Olympics. And he was the one who came out with the very classic line at the end when everything was resolved, when he said that his father told him that seldom are our worst fears or our greatest hopes realized. Today, our worst fears were realized. 2 of the hostages were killed in their dormitories. 9 more were killed at the airport. They're all gone. And that was about as touching a bit of writing as anybody could come up with. And I know Jim McKay got telegrams from both Peter Jennings and Walter Cronkite saying that he had done the industry proud by his work there that day. And Doug, I know you were in the control room that day. What was it like?
Well, it was extraordinary, and very, very difficult day. McKay, that was supposed to be Jim's day off, He was called, he was in a swimming pool, he'd been in the sauna, and he went in the swimming pool in the morning, and he got a call, and to come to the studio right away, because Roone wanted him to be the man, the point person for the telecast. And he put his trousers on over his wet bathing suit, and he went to the studio, and he was on for 16 hours, reporting the tragedy of the terrorists. I'm so glad you brought up the way he
described
told the final result, because he was also realizing that he was going to tell by saying what he was going to say, he was telling the people in Ohio that their son, who was on the team, was killed. And he had to he set the scene. He set the scene the way you told it, to lead into that moment. You know, there's another secret that he had. You said he was like a next door neighbor. Arthur Godfrey, if you can remember Arthur Godfrey, remember Arthur Godfrey, told Jim when he first came to CBS in New York from Baltimore that when you're looking into camera, don't think you're talking to millions of people. Just talk to one person. And Jim almost always was talking to his wife, Margaret. And that's what gave him that informal, kind of intimate, easy way of explaining where he was and how he communicated so strongly with people without appearing to be a host. He was your friend, he was your pal, he was your uncle, he was your brother, telling you what it was like to be in these amazing places.
And when that actually happened, it emphasized that how strong a writer he was. He came from the newspaper world, from the Baltimore Sun, and so he understood the power of words. And I think that also helped Wide World of Sports, and you can go into this a little more, because as you mentioned, most Wide World of Sports segments were pre-recorded, and they were edited down, and there had to be a script that went with it. This wasn't all live action, so that you knew when certain things were going to happen, and you could build up emotion. And I think that you know, you and I had discussed in past years how Wide World of Sports literally became the sports show for non-sports fans. This was a show where daughters and fathers who might otherwise have nothing in common, they could sit and watch this and be entertained.
Absolutely, and Jim was the master of that. Of course, as you said, he was a journalist first of all. There was I used to do a little I do a show every now and then, a little lecture and so forth. And one of the most touching moments I ever had was when a woman came up with tears in her eyes after the show and saying how much Wide World of Sports meant to her, because it was on Saturday afternoons that she bonded with her dad when they all watched Wide World of Sports. Jim was he put the verbal frosting on our production cake week after week after week, and I always felt and still do feel I lived in the reflected glory of Jim McKay and the great athletes that we talked about and that we showed.
And you know, Doug, beyond Jim McKay, Wide World of Sports was kind of the incubator for a lot of talent. Also, you had Leroy Neiman, who came out of Wide World of Sports, and who was a fantastic artist.
Right, he was. I have a Neiman hanging in my house.
I used to see him on 66th Street with that handlebar mustache. I adored him because he was always, you know, he always had a nice smile and a very kind of leisurely air about him.
We were on the way to Canada when Roon had hired him to do a freeze, if you will, to wrap up each day, and the idea would be he would add to the artwork of the events each day, and at the end of the event, why you'd have a whole wall of his artistry, and it was printed up and sent to people later on. It was that's what I had. He sent me an artist proof of it afterwards. I didn't know what I had, and now I do.
Right, if we had only known then. But even we're talking about. It seems like I'm all over the place. We're talking about politicians. We're talking about a lot of people. But what about Arledge's relationship with the Kennedys? We're going to talk about that. We will expand that on the other side of the break, because we're getting into our final quarter hour. You are listening to Westchester Eye on the radio, Ear on the radio too, because we have Doug Wilson as a guest. Stick with us, folks, for our final quarter hour. We'll be back.
WVOX. Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Here we are again. Rainy Monday. But we are inside. You're inside. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. I am Ardina Seward along with John Charan. Peter Moses is out today, but in is Doug Wilson, who is a winner of 17 Emmys, wrote a book, and has a lot of stories about sports.
And that book is The World Was Our Stage, Spanning the Globe with ABC Sports by Doug Wilson and Judy Cohan, and it's available at Amazon.com and fine booksellers everywhere. Is that right, Doug?
Thank you very much.
John got it all
Thank you
in 10 seconds or less. John.
Well, listen, you mentioned before the break his Roone Arledge's relationship with the Kennedys, and of course that's in his private life, but it really did blossom into our coverage of the Special Olympics over the years, and we are very proud of having participated in that, and to have the Special Olympics on Wide World of Sports really made people jumpstart the awareness of that wonderful event.
And speaking about awareness, we'd like to talk about the issue now that's dominating the news about political protest in sports. I mean, there have been political protests prior to Colin Kaepernick. There was
Colin Kaepernick.
Colin Kaepernick. Pardon me, my pronunciation.
Exactly, it's not your area of expertise.
Not my area of expertise.
But Doug, you were experienced with protests from back in the 1960s. So why don't you fill in about the protests that went on in sports back then?
Well, one of the protests, as everybody will remember, was Muhammad Ali not stepping forward and to join the military. I mean if you look back on that, and Tommy Smith raising the fists at the Olympic Games in 1968 when they were on the victory stand, and at the end of the year, Curt Flood challenging the reserve clause. The reserve clause, so that the problem for me is it has a different flavor somehow now. I think that in those days when there was going to be a protest, they understood they were protesting, they would have to face consequences, and today there's a different feel to it somehow. And I'm sorry that it's become such an important side story for every football game now. It's really sad to me.
But does it also not seem that now the NFL owners are getting dragged into the politics of the event?
Politics of the event and politics of the country. The owners, of course, have different views themselves on what should be done. I think it's I'm a guy whose grandfather said the most beautiful thing in the world is the American flag waving in the wind. Mm-hmm. So I have my feelings about it personally. I think it's unfortunate I understand he's got freedoms. They've got freedom of speech, and they have freedom to do what they want to do. But there's a sadness to it that I don't like to see the flag or the national anthem disrespected.
And that's one of the reasons why broadcast ratings and viewership is going down. But I think in addition to that, we see that the quality and the style of the telecasts really aren't as good as they used to be. What made ABC's Wide World of Sports and ABC Sports in general such a strong storytelling operation, and what can modern sports take from that and improve themselves with?
Well, I think what's happened is that content has taken a second role to the graphics and the pace. Mm-hmm. That they seem to have to be frantic in getting the pace down. Also, the announcers, when you think of the announcers we had, Howard Cosell and Chris Schenkel and Frank Gifford
and Keith Jackson,
those guys, I think they made a tremendous difference in what we see today. I don't know if there's an answer. Contents is not overriding the character of the event, and it seems like you have to keep everybody's attention every 3 seconds to instead of taking the time to tell the stories. We took time to tell stories.
Well, how much of that is dominated by sponsors themselves? You know, we used to have a saying that we went out of the business in news. We went out of the business of news when news became a business. And has that same thing happened in sports, where you've gone out of the business of sports broadcasting because the sponsors now dictate the content?
That's interesting. I was never on the sales side, so I can't give you an inside answer on that. But it sounds like to me that the spot. Look at the commercials. I look at commercials today, and very often the commercials end, and I don't even know what they were. I can't figure out what they were advertising. That when things go by so fast. Maybe I'm just getting older, but I hope that's not the case. I think there's a frantic aspect to television today, and of course also there's a saturation of sports programming. In our day, back in the day, there were only 3 networks. It's hard to remember that 3 networks. The sports television was like a town meeting of the country. And people would be talking about one thing that they saw the next day in the office or the next Monday after the Saturday's Wide World. Today, last Saturday, there were 3 football games, college football games on Saturday night, running simultaneously on 3 different networks. And so it's not the same at all in that respect.
Well, I think that hopefully quality will always win over content, but the digital age has certainly changed
and the networks basically don't want to spend the money anymore because they're all looking for to cut corners and to save money. And so as a result, a lot of talent is shown the door in terms of these buyouts. So all your talent, be it behind the camera or in front of it, a lot of that talent is forced out, and then you get new faces who have less experience and less ability. So, I mean, I agree with you, Ardina. I think that the issue we're talking here is, again, comes back to money. And back in your day, Doug, you were pretty fortunate because until ABC was acquired by Cap Cities in the early or late 1970s, you were given a budget and you were able to work within it.
And the budget people serviced production. And then what happened when Capital Cities took over, production serviced the budget. Mm-hmm. In other words, we would go out and we would go and do a survey on an event and figure out how many cameras we needed and if we had new platforms or announce booths or whatever we needed to do, and go back and tell them that's what we needed. And they were able to figure out a way to underwrite that stuff. As time passed and things changed, we were told you have 4 cameras to do this event, and this is what you have to spend. And we had to be it was more efficient, yes, and we still kept, I think, our criteria very high over the years.
And Doug, we're going to have to leave it at that. We thank you very much for phoning in. We've been speaking with Doug Wilson, a winner of 17 Emmy Awards as a producer and director with ABC's Wide World of Sports. His book is The World Was Our Stage.
1460 WVOX and WVIP HD2, New Rochelle.